Hello there, OrangeGambit here, and today we're going to be ranking EU4's idea groups. This is for EU4 version 1.37. The reason why I'm putting the version here is in case EU4 gets some update that breaks this entire tier list out of date. I don't think that's going to happen because of Project Caesar in development, EU5, and also that Johan has brought up that a lot of EU4's code developers have been moved over to Project Caesar. So I don't think EU4 is going to be getting updates other than stuff like mission trees, events, final polish before they stop developing the game. So I don't think this tier list is going to be out of date, but you never know. I can't predict the future. We're going to be doing this in a tier list system, and I'll be talking about what each of the 5 tiers mean to me because I find that everybody defines them a little differently. First, there's S tier. These are the idea groups that you will regret not taking. And I find that I regret it when I don't take these idea groups. They're just so good. They put your country in such a powerful position by solving very specific problems. And if you don't take them, when you hit like 1700 in EU4, you're going to be in a very different position with the problems that these idea groups solve. I find that you can take them on almost any nation, and they will always make your nation better. And you really can't go wrong by taking these idea groups. Then there's A tier. A tier idea groups are still very powerful. In fact, I think they can sometimes be as powerful as S tier. But I think the main difference is that they're not always consistently that powerful. Sometimes they're extremely powerful, and sometimes they aren't that good. They're just very unpredictable, and so they're just not as reliable as S tier, so I can't say you should take these idea groups every single game. Then there's B tier. B tier idea groups are still powerful. I'm not going to say any of them are bad by any of the means, but they need very specific situations to be worth taking over the S and A tier idea groups. I find that B tier, these idea groups they don't have the universality or the power unless it's very specific situations, and those situations are so specific that they just belong on their own tier. They're not like S and A tier where you plug them in and you're guaranteed to do pretty well. Or an S tier, just plug in and guaranteed to dominate. B tier idea groups, I find they're not like that. Then there's C tier. C tier idea groups, I find, and I think this is probably the biggest gap between these tiers, I just find that they're not great. I don't think that they're a waste of mana points. I think that they can be very useful in specific builds. But if you're doing specific builds, I'm kind of confused why you're here. Like, why are you looking at some general tier list video? You're off chasing a specific modifier. You're not looking at what's generally useful for most countries. So I think that for C tier, these are the idea groups that I find they're just outcompeted by the other idea groups, but they're not bad. Like, they're not going to make your game worse or be a waste of mana points. Finally, there's D tier. These idea groups just suck. There's no other way of putting it. I regret taking these whenever I do talk myself into taking these idea groups, and you really should not be taking these idea groups. I find that they are worse than the mana point investment. You should put that mana points into like development, mercantilism, strengthening your government support, making generals. These idea groups are just so meh that they're not worth the mana points, and you should avoid taking them in any game. There are games where I will reach 16 and 1700 where I somehow talk myself into taking these idea groups, and I'm worse off. I really just think that my position is just so much worse than I am. I'm struggling against AI. I just really shouldn't in situations where I shouldn't be. And finally, while I do concede that there's like specific times that these idea groups can be useful, you're still reaching a point where they're so bad that having these instead of like an S, A, or even B tier idea group, you're just worse off. And unless you're doing something extremely specific, there's no reason to take these. Just never take them. I don't know why anyone would take them. And those are the tiers. Next, I'd like to talk about what situation this tier list is useful for. I'm talking about single-player games, not multiplayer games. The main difference between single-player and multiplayer is that in single-player, you can go very wide, you can blob in every direction, while multiplayer, once you start hitting like 10, 15 players, You can't really expand very much once you hit 1500 without a player war, which forces you to be a lot more conservative in how you expand and focuses on idea groups that are a lot better at getting what you can out of your land rather than obtaining more land. The single player obtaining more land is always better because that's more development that you can use and less development that the AI can use. The ultimate goal of single player and multiplayer to some extent is to have as much province autonomy adjusted province developments that you can, because with that in mind, that gives you your money, your manpower, and your ability to influence the world. While in multiplayer, you just focused a lot more on having higher quality armies, squeezing as much as you can out of your land, being able to survive player wars. The other three situations that this is not as useful for is world conquests, just because that has a very specific idea group medium. While I think the S tier idea groups are still very good for world conquest, I think that that's world conquest is just one situation out of many in single player, and this is more of a broad useful. This tier list is much more like you're playing a random country in a random situation. Which idea group should you pick? Rather than very specific ones in like multiplayer or conquest, just because those are a lot more rigid in what ideas you can take. So the first idea group that we're going to be talking about is innovative ideas. Innovative ideas are a very unique idea group in the sense that you really should be taking these first if you're going to take innovative ideas. The reason for that is because it has the extremely powerful minus 10% technology cost modifier, which is just massive. This gives you minus 10% technology cost on every technology that you take after you take it. Now, what does 10% tech cost mean? That is 60 monarch points. 60 monarch points per tech is a lot of monarch points. Let's say you take this at admin tech 5, and you play till admin tech 30, which is close to the 1800s. 60 admin points per tech for 25 techs is 1,500 monarch points, which is one of the highest ways you could save monarch points over the course of the game. What I also think you'd probably would notice is this isn't 1,500 monarch points total. That's 1,500 monarch points per type of tech. So this can save you easily 4,000 monarch points if you take this early on and you play through most of the game. The downside, though, is the later you take innovative ideas, the weaker this modifier gets. If you take this at like Amatech 7, that is 120 less monarch points you benefit from just because you take it later in the game. And the downside of all this means is that innovative ideas' strongest ability gets weaker as time is later you take the idea group. So you're pretty much encouraged to take this idea group first. Unfortunately, the rest of the idea group isn't really well set up for that. You get advisor cost reduction, which is a good modifier, but you're not really spending a lot on advisors until the middle game, so you're not going to benefit from this idea group immediately. You've also got monthly war exhaustion, which is a very good modifier. It used to be a lot more rare, and if it was more rare, I'd probably put innovative ideas up a notch. War exhaustion is just so bad. It gives you slower sieges. It gives you more core creation cost. It's just a really bad modifier that you want reduced. But because it's easier to reduce war exhaustion than ever, and you can just slowly wait for it to go away, this isn't going to, be a life-changing modifier. Finally, Innovative Ideas is really well known for its strong policies, and the +1 free policy puts you in a great position to use those policies. Unfortunately, this means that you also are limited to taking other idea groups that have good policies, which admittedly for Innovative Ideas do tend to be some of the better ideas. The most famous one is the +15% infantry combat ability from Quality Ideas. And if you're taking this innovative quality, that's a very good build for infantry. Unfortunately, though, because Innovative Ideas, you only get the most benefit by taking it early, which is a very specific situation, but you don't get all of the benefits until later in the game, meaning that this idea group doesn't really pay off till later. This isn't an idea group that you can take mid-game for those mid-game benefits. You really should be taking this idea group first. Those limitations make Innovative Ideas much weaker than it should be based on its ideas alone. And because of that, in practice, it's only B tier. You need idea groups that are very powerful early, that can get you to a strong mid game, not an idea group that will give you a better mid game and end game if you somehow make it there without an S tier or A tier idea group. The other problem that Innovative Ideas does is it gives you a ton of mid and late game monarch points, especially late game monarch points. But the problem, as you probably might have noticed, is you don't need those monarch points as much in that time of the game. You need them much earlier in the game. EU4 has this problem where because of the feature bloat, there's so many monarch points you're swimming around by the late game that putting the monarch points later in the game is not when you need the monarch points. You need the monarch points earlier in the game. And Innovative Ideas doesn't do very much to help you there. It does give you, I guess, a fair amount if you're doing like a Native American run and the tech costs are just so expensive that you just need ways to reduce them. And if you're doing a native run, I'd probably put Innovative Ideas closer to A and S tier, just because other ways of using mono points like development are so expensive and not really useful. But you know, you unless you're in a situation where you're needing to catch up in technology, you don't. Innovative Ideas, just in my opinion, aren't good enough to be above B tier. Although they are probably the strongest B tier idea group. Now we have religious ideas. Religious ideas are well known for their last idea, Deus Vult, which gives you a CB on all of your heretic and heathen neighbors. Many people I've seen put religious ideas in S tier for this alone, just because it gives you a free CB, they give you 25% less aggressive expansion, and the rest of religious ideas is still very good. It makes converting provinces a lot easier. It makes, having those converted provinces give you a lot more benefits, like tolerance to the true faith. And overall, it makes your realm extremely stable. And in my opinion, converting with missionaries is one of the best ways to get prestige in the game. So this is a fantastic idea group for giving you prestige. Unfortunately, though, I don't entirely agree with the idea that religious ideas are an S tier, just because, as you might have noticed, you need to be around heretics and heathens for this idea group to be useful. If you're in, let's say, the middle of Europe before the Protestant Reformation happens, religious ideas isn't going to do anything for you. If you're in the middle of the Middle East and you have like all Sunni and like one Shia province, religious idea groups isn't going to be very useful for you. If you are in the middle of Japan and everything Shinto, religious ideas are not going to be that useful for you. And that's sort of the problem with religious ideas is you need to be on a borderline between areas of religion. And until you hit that, religious ideas aren't that useful. And so because religious ideas are only useful in those situations, I have to move it down to A tier. I still think can be S tier levels of power, and I think it is the strongest A tier idea group. I'll put the stronger idea groups in the left-hand side here and the weaker ones to the right. But I think that it's just too situational to be S tier. There's so many times that, different idea group is better than religious, even if religious idea groups is probably the strongest idea group if you are in between two areas of religion. And a major reason why those other idea groups better is how you're going to get there if you're not there. Sure, maybe if you're in Europe, you can wait for like 100 years and eventually Protestantism will pop up and you have to deal with that. But there's no guarantee that Protestantism will hit where you are. Usually it does spawn in northern Germany, but I've seen games where Italy and Spain get hit the hardest and northern Germany and Scandinavia stay Catholic. Like, you can't really predict those kinds of things, and I prefer an idea group that lets me expand to those areas rather than an idea group that lets me blob and process those ideas more easily. Next, we have economic ideas. Economic ideas are designed to do one thing well, and it's to make you more money. Unfortunately for economic ideas, it's not the best idea group for making you more money. I'll get to that one later. But because it's not the best idea group in terms of making you more money, it already runs into the problem where it's the second best at its job. And that's not a great place to be. I'd say that economic ideas does have a couple of really good modifiers that you can't find elsewhere. You get stuff like, you get +1 development for manufactories, which is pretty good if you can afford to make manufactories. But at the same time, I mean, if you don't have, the money needed to make manufactories, economic ideas isn't going to get you there by itself. It gives you gold depletion chance, well, rather a negative to gold depletion chance, which is pretty good, but it means you need to have gold first. And if you don't have gold first, then you're going to run into problems there because it's not going to be useful for you. It's also useful in making debt less bad for your country with loan repayment, reduction, inflation reduction, and interest. But at the same time, I don't know why you're taking loans if your goal is to make more money. It's still not cost effective to take loans to build buildings and then to pay off the loans later. And finally, there is the incredibly powerful plus 10% goods produced modifier. But at the same time, it just doesn't do enough, in my opinion, with that to make you money needed to spiral out of control using the money. The other problem that economic ideas has is that because this money you get from economic ideas is not zero sum, you get it from makes your land better, and it doesn't take money from other people like many of these other idea groups are very good at. It just, you are getting stronger, but it doesn't make your neighbors weaker. And so economic ideas will unfortunately never be as powerful as other ones that are better at you at taking resources from your rivals rather than developing your own. I will also say that late game money is probably the weakest resource between monarch points, manpower, and money. And the reason for that is just because you eventually run out of things to spend your money on in terms of buildings and upgrades. Your great projects can only eat so much. And so I often, when I'm taking economic ideas, I feel like I just have so much money in the pot that I should have gone something else that makes it easier for me to use that money rather than having money in itself. One thing I will give economic ideas is it's really well known for its policy with quality, which gives you plus 5% discipline. And economic ideas is really good ability to suck money out of its own territory, makes it a very popular like A or S tier multiplayer idea group. But for single player, which is a lot more focused on increasing your own development rather than making your development more useful, economic ideas is unfortunately at B tier, definitely worse than innovative. But it's still a good idea group if you need more money or you want that quality plus 5% discipline policy. Expansion ideas. Oh boy, expansion ideas. I'll be honest here, I don't like expansion ideas. Expansion ideas are good at helping you colonize more land yourself. And the problem about this is that colonizing land isn't very good in EU4. Taking land is very good in EU4. So if somebody else colonizes land, you should take it from them. You shouldn't be colonizing it yourself. And the reason why is that colonists make it so that you have to spend 2 ducats a month on colonizing land. Meanwhile, if you just took the land yourself, you're not having to spend that way to colonize. And the thing about expansion ideas, you still have to pay for coining the land either way. So there's really no benefit to colonizing it yourself over just conquering it from someone, so this idea group that makes it a lot easier to colonize land doesn't do anything for you. The only modifier on this that I really like is the minus 10% from autonomy in territories, which it is a good modifier, but because it does make territories a lot better. The territories start at 90%, and which reduces it to 80%, which means that you get effectively double tax and manpower from the province. But if the province was so good, then why didn't you just make it a state? Or if it has a really good production item and it's a trade estuary, why don't you make it a trade company? You shouldn't be having provinces lying around that are really good as unstated territories. It doesn't make sense why you would do this. And you couldn't be like, well, what about governing capacity? But then you should take an idea group that gives you more governing capacity, not an idea that lets you get slightly more autonomy from territories. And so because you're only getting, 10% development from your worst provinces, because, these are probably provinces that you can't convert, the provinces that aren't your culture, one thing isn't enough to get expansion out of the tier that it belongs in. You can stack minimum autonomy from territories to do pretty crazy stuff in EU4, but that's such a rare and specific case that it doesn't justify putting expansion above D tier. So expansion is our first member of D tier. Speaking of an idea group that makes it easier to core and state land, we have administrative ideas. In my opinion, administrative ideas are broken because of one modifier, and it's minus 25% core creation cost. And I'll be honest with you, everybody who takes administrative ideas takes it for this one modifier. Minus 25% core creation cost is extremely good. What it does is it makes it so that you can core land for 2.5 less admin points per development. This also makes you core land faster as well. So this makes it incredibly easy for you to blob and take territory. Its modifier is so powerful and so high that, in my opinion, it should be nerfed. It probably should be 15 or 20% instead of 25%, but it's been this way for so long, and people have been taking administrative ideas for it for so long, that's why it's there. It's not a problem in multiplayer, but in single player, this is an incredibly powerful modifier. The rest of admin ideas is pretty good. It used to be worse because it used to be like pretty much a pseudo mercenary ideas, but instead the rest of these do make governing a larger country more easily with making administrative advisors cheaper, makes you lower autonomy, less administrative idea cost. But the other idea that's really powerful is plus 20% governing capacity. This means that you can turn 20% more development into states. In a single player game where you're blobbing, administrative ideas are king. They definitely belong in S tier, and that's where they're going to be in this video. Humanist Ideas. How the mighty have fallen. So Humanist Ideas, in my opinion, used to be one of the, if not the best idea group when I started playing EU4. I started playing when Common Sense came out, so even before EU4 had a state. I know, so long ago. And Humanist back then was really good because it stopped rebellions. And back then, rebellions used to be worse, and you used to have less ways to mitigate them or benefit off of improving the land. But now in E4, I would prefer to be able to expand more quickly, have a stronger military in putting down rebellions, or converting the land using religious ideas to get the prestige and high tolerance of true faith, than it is just keeping the land that's not my culture and not my religion, which I'm going to get penalties no matter what I do, to hate me less. And that's sort of the problem with humanist ideas. It's just not worth an idea group slot to make your own people that are going to hate you less. You can do so many other more things with it. And the only real benefit that it does, other than that, is it has an idea cost reduction, which is a really powerful modifier. It is one of the strongest modifiers you can early in the game, but it's not something you want to use early in the game, getting humanist ideas, because you're not expanding into a ton of land that isn't your culture and isn't your own religion at the start of the game most of the time. And so while there's specific countries like, Crusader states, Ottomans, that I think could benefit from humanist ideas because they get a lot of bonuses to heretics and heathens already. Even if a Crusader state, I think I'd rather just take religious and convert it, even though you have a huge heretics buff. Yeah, there's just not that many situations where humanist ideas are good. You want to take them early, but most of your benefits don't roll until later. And so I will shout out that it does have a really good policy of offensive, which makes it so you don't really have to deal with separatism anymore. But that's one edge case build, and I still don't think it's worth taking humanist over something like religious or administrative ideas. So unfortunately, it's C tier. It's outcompeted by the ones above it, even if I don't think it's a terrible idea group in of itself. Now we have infrastructure ideas. Infrastructure ideas are the best idea group in the game for playing tall. Why? It's because it has the minus 10% dev cost in its ambition that economic ideas used to have. In fact, economic ideas was nerfed heavily by that minus 10% dev cost being moved to infrastructure ideas. Infrastructure ideas not only has that minus 10% dev cost, but it's so good at stacking dev cost and make it so it's cheaper to expand administration, which gives you dev cost. It gives you more prosperity, which, as you guess it, gives you dev cost. It makes having lower state maintenance, which is usually worthless, but if you're running a minus 10% dev cost edict on every state, it makes it easier to get dev cost. And over time and time again, infrastructure ideas are just super good at lowering dev cost and playing tall. In fact, it's so good at playing tall that it's one of the main reasons why I put innovative at B tier. I think Innovative Ideas used to be the best idea group in the game at playing tall before Infrastructure Ideas came into the game. And for that reason, because it's so useful at playing tall, Infrastructure Ideas have to go into A tier. Now, you may be a little bit confused because you might be like, well, you like blobbing so much. That's why you put admin so high. But how EU4 has developed is that late game, there's so many monarch points flowing around that you basically run out of things to deal with them. Even if you don't take an idea, you could like Innovative Ideas, you still have so many monarch points floating around that you have nothing to do but develop your best provinces. And because this is the best idea group in the game for developing your provinces, it should go into A tier, in my opinion. Now, it won't necessarily get you into that big unstoppable point much more easily. I still think administrative is better, but pretty much every game that I want to do tall, I take Infrastructure Ideas as my first or second one. It also is very good at giving you some movement speed modifiers, which are really hard to get otherwise. And and for that reason, combined with its construction cost, can't believe I forgot to talk about that. Because the construction cost is super good at building up the land that you have developed, that it is just so good that it should be it's the best one in terms of developing your country. Like a lot of people call it the greedier version of economic ideas, because this will let you scale faster than the short-term buffs of economic. So this belongs at A tier. We have the idea group next that probably is a contender for the one idea group that has received the most buffs in EU4, Espionage. Espionage definitely used to be considered the worst idea group in the game for so long, just because the stuff it provided wasn't very good. But over the years, it's been steadily buffed, with the aggressive expansion reduction being moved from influence to espionage, espionage working well with the new mechanics like corruption, and overall just being a very powerful idea group these days. The massive aggressive expansion is definitely one of the strongest modifiers it has. I like the yearly corruption reduction. It makes it so that you can debase your currency and your money will eventually go away rather than you having to pay it off through rooting corruption. It lets you claim entire states, which gives you a reduction in core creation cost, which, as you know, is one of the best modifiers in the game. It also makes it more easy to support rebels, which is a very underrated interaction, one of the best ways at getting power projection. And in fact, because of its, I believe it, it has the ability to give you more advisor cost as well. It makes it easier to give you more monarch points because it also gives you that from power protection and advisor cost. Overall, it's just a very powerful idea group. You can use it anywhere, anytime. More monthly favors makes you more powerful. In my opinion, espionage is just, it's powerful. It belongs in S tier. Anybody can use it. It's probably the weakest of the S tier idea groups, but like less coalitions, cheaper advisors. And these benefits can be useful at any point in the game. Espionage is great. There's no other reason to put it anywhere else. I think every country can benefit from espionage, and there are times that I regret not taking espionage if I need to claim a lot of land or expand quickly. Now, the nice version of espionage ideas, diplomatic ideas. Diplomatic ideas are just an insanely good idea group. The main thing that it does well is expansion. And you might be wondering how it does that because, society grew up being nice. But its most powerful modifier is the minus 20% province war score cost. Province war score is one of the main limiters, and not the biggest limiter in expansion in EU4, because you have to deal with truces in between every war. And so diplomatic ideas gives you the ability to take a lot more land per war. Something else it also does, which you might know is lowered diplomatic impact from actions, is you can also break those truces more easily. You can do no CB wars more easily. Diplomatic Ideas lets you get all those expansion opportunities that are extremely difficult to achieve otherwise. What it also does is it massively reduces your aggressive expansion. Now, you might wonder, how does it do that? It doesn't give you minus aggressive expansion. But its improved relations means that it makes it so your aggressive expansion ticks down faster with other countries, so in the end, each point of aggressive expansion negatively impacts your expansion prospects less. Combined with its diplomatic reputation, which makes it easier to get alliances, and if you are a Catholic monarchy, get the emperorship. It's a million diplomats that this policy gives you, and its policies give you along with the ideas. Diplomatic ideas is just lets you to be dominant in single player, and I think it's the strongest idea group in the game for single player. So it goes at the top of S tier. I think that it should be taken in almost every game, especially if you're one that needs to expand quickly. Remember how I said that economic ideas here wasn't the best idea group in making you more money, despite it being an idea group that is entirely focused on making you more money? It's because the best idea group in making you more money is trade. And the reason for that is that trade ideas is really good at making you more money with, you guessed it, trade. And trade is the best way of making more money in this game. It's something that you can get across the world. There's some areas that are better placed for it, particularly if you are at an end node or on the pathway from Asia to Europe. Those are the best ways to make money in this game, is just sunken trade from that. And the sheer amount of money that you can get from trade makes trade ideas so powerful because they're extremely effective at giving you that trade, from inland caravan power to so many other ways, like its million merchants, from policies. It's just very powerful in giving you more money from trade. And also, it buffs it through its policies, through its great goods produced policy with quantity and its trade efficiency. And these are with idea groups like quality and quantity that you'll be finding out later in the video that you want to be taking anyway. So I think that trade is a great idea group. I think that it's the best one in the game in making you more money. The only downside, as you probably can tell, as I've already mentioned, is if you're not in an end node or the connecting nodes from Asia to Europe, you're not going to make that much money off a trade. If you are, let's say, in the middle of Africa, if you are in North America, if you are in Northern Asia, you can't make a ton of money off trade. At least it's a lot harder to do so. And the best way to do so is to expand, not by taking trade ideas if you're in that situation. It's just to take somebody else's trade. I will say that another perk, though, of taking people's trade, even using trade ideas, is it takes money from somebody else to give to you rather than buffing it yourself, which means that it's a zero-sum game. So if one person takes economic ideas and you take trade ideas, and you would hypothetically have the same amount of money off that, which you're not, trade's going to make you more money, you would still make more money than the guy of economic ideas because you could steal the guy of economic ideas as trade. So for that reason, trade ideas, I rank it in the high A tier. It's not S tier just because you can't do it everywhere and you're not guaranteed to succeed, but it's still powerful enough for you to succeed using it wherever you go. So I think that trade's great. I think that it's obviously, in the bad regions, it's probably C tier level, but it can get to S tier levels in terms of money. So I think that just the lack of reliability keeps you from pushing this to S tier. But other than that, it's a strong idea group. We have exploration ideas. And exploration ideas are probably one of the hardest for me to rank in the game because exploration ideas are good at one thing. They are incredibly good at one thing. And it's Mexico. They're good at conquering and taking Mexico. And Mexico is unique in the game because you can make more gold money off of taking Mexico than any other region in the game. Even if it's a colonial nation, the treasure fleet money that you'll be making by taking Mexico is so ludicrous that you just will not have money problems for the rest of the game. I will say that you will get inflation issues, which pairs this well with economic ideas. But other than that, I mean, the money that you'll make off of Mexico is so much, and the force limit if you turn Mexico into a crown colony is so much that it makes you militarily powerful in ways that colonizing really just can't do anywhere else in the game. The reason why exploration does that is it lets you bum rush Mexico. It lets you get your explorer. It lets you tactically take the right provinces to find Mexico, and then to make a claim on a Mexican native when they're still weak and may have like 5 mil tech and you have like 10 mil tech, and you conquer the whole region in one fell swoop. The reason why the speed's also important is because of how other countries are competing you for it. Spain and Portugal will make it to Mexico if you don't rush this. And so, for that reason, because you have this massive potential, exploration is just so much better than expansion because it lets you basically take the best colonial region in the game. Now, as you can probably tell, the problem with this strategy is if you aren't the first to make it to Mexico, or if you do it too late, or you don't want to go for Mexico, this idea group's D tier. Like it's just terrible. The naval force limit, ain't bad at making it like a pseudo naval idea group with the naval attrition, but like it's just bad otherwise. Like you're not gonna do anything. Like sure you'll like find Canadian provinces to colonize. So what? Like you'd rather conquer that off of somebody else if you want Canada so badly. And if you might be like, well, what about the 7 cities of gold? And I've seen the Fountain of Youth fire like 2-3 games. You can get 700 gold for having 3,000 guys looking around at the Conquistador, and you can get a couple of admin points, good events from that. But in reality, I'd say that's more of a way to make this idea group be justified if you're keeping it after you take Mexico along with the treasure fleet income, rather than it being good in itself. So for those reasons, because like taking Mexico, it has to go into B tier. It just gives you that level of potential that an idea group can't. Because I mean, if you are like, I've done Hamburg games or like any country that you're just weak on the west coast of Europe, I will just go for Mexico. That is my number one goal. And then I will be much stronger in like 100 years because of that. And in those situations, that keeps exploration alive as an idea group. It's just so good in that scenario. But it's worthless otherwise. It's completely garbage otherwise. So, and as you might notice, it's because isn't a colonizing idea group. It pretends to be, but in reality, it's a conquer Mexico natives through coring and taking the land using, these to help you. That's what the idea group's useful for. So that's sort of where it is. It's a great way to conquer. I think that the level of power you can get from bum rushing Mexico is powerful. It's weak otherwise, so it sticks to B tier. Take it and you're trying to take Mexico. Don't take it otherwise. Next, we have Maritime Ideas. Maritime Ideas do one thing incredibly well, and it's help you build a bigger fleet. Now, you might have already realized the problem with Maritime Ideas, and it is that fleets are mostly useless in this game. And the reason why they're mostly useless, is what can you do with them? You can destroy other people's fleets. You can then blockade their coast after you destroyed their fleets and steal a little bit of money off them. You can land troops, which will then lose the battle because your army sucks because you only invested into your fleet. And that's sort of the problem at Maritimes, is it doesn't address any of those problems. Like, it helps your fleet repair off of the coast so they can blockade more easily. It helps you build a bigger fleet because they have a higher force limit. Like, these things don't solve those problems. And you can even get a bigger fleet anyway through economic infrastructure or any of the other idea groups, because just by taking more land, taking more money, you can then afford a bigger battle fleet and just go over your force limit, which isn't that expensive unless you're only building heavy ships. And Maritime just doesn't. Like, you can just doesn't, it's not even like you can do stuff with Maritime and do the other things that the idea groups has without taking Maritime. Maritime can help you a bit with like trade fleets, but again, you're better off just taking the land yourself or just using your trade ideas, the money you got off of that, to then build your trade fleet than it is to just use Maritime Ideas. So Maritime Ideas is D tier. I took it once in a Malta game because I wanted to make myself a bigger Navy powerhouse. And every time I went off my island of Malta, I got attacked by the Ottomans and died. So, I didn't get annexed in that game, but it was miserable. I regretted taking it. Maritime, gave me one of the best navies in the Mediterranean, and it gave me no application to that navy. So it doesn't even guarantee you win battles. Like, your ships aren't better than other people's either. Like, if you're Malta and you got like 5 to 10 more ships and you're fighting the Ottomans, your ships, if they got the same number of ships as you, your ships are still going to not do well because, They're not, because you just got more ships. They're not better ships. And because of how naval engagement works in this game, because you can only engage so many ships at the same time, better ships are always better than more ships. So what's even worse about Maritime Ideas is it's not even the best at helping you win the seas. Somebody else could just take a different idea group that gives you, actual buffs to, fleet combat and crush you. So it's D tier. Doesn't really do. It helps you build a big fleet. Doesn't help you do anything with a big fleet. Don't take it. This idea group is terrible. Influence ideas. So influence ideas are what a lot of people call like diplomatic ideas poor cousin. And it's hard for me to disagree with that. It was really well known for its aggressive expansion reduction that was moved to espionage. And now, as a result, between espionage and diplomatic ideas, it really stands out with its inability to reduce aggressive expansion, which makes it harder to take for blobbing than either of those two. It does have the really great diplomatic annexation cost reduction, which if you take with administrative ideas, which you should be, you can annex vassals extremely cheaply. And combined with that, it makes your vassals before you annex them a lot better and buff you much more strongly. So it helps you grow and it helps you expand, but it's just a lot weaker than those two in achieving that goal. The other thing is it does, though, have a lot of benefits if you are a colonizer. If you got, like, for instance, a giant colonial Mexico from your expansion ideas, the force limit contribution does also increase that. So you do get more troops from your subjects, like your colonial nations, I believe, and it does make your envoys cheaper so they can run around abroad. And so influence ideas are kind of like, what expansion ideas should have been, but it's still not, like S tier levels. That's a very good situation. And I always take influence ideas if I have a ton of subjects or if I'm doing crazy things abroad. But because of its just general weakness compared to those two and being outmatched fairly consistently, unless you're doing an insane amount of vassal feeding, which is a good way of expansion, but it's not the only way. It unfortunately only gets to A tier. I think just, claiming everything and then using administrative and diplomatic ideas are just better at rapidly expansion. You still have to deal with autonomy when you do annex a vassal, so you're usually weaker off after you read a subject. So influence ideas just goes in A tier. It's unfortunately the weakest out of those three diplomatic idea groups, although it still shines above maritime and exploration. Now, an idea group and diplomatic side of things that doesn't shine above these two is Horde Ideas. And Horde Ideas are just awful. I don't really. There's two situations that it's okay-ish to take these. And it is you are doing a China game and you're trying to rush down mandate. And this makes it easier for you to not blow up when your eunuchs hate you. Or you're doing a game where you are keeping all of your privileges and you're not getting rid of all your state privileges for absolutism, which you probably should be doing if you're doing a blobbing game. But at the same time, you still want the benefit from absolutism. Those are the only two times where it is somewhat okay to take Horde Ideas. And those two situations are not even the best ideas. I would rather just take diplomatic ideas if you want to expand. Absolutism gives you administrative efficiency. Well, the benefits of these two idea groups are way more than you get from the absolutism of Horde Ideas in that one specific situation. It also, if you're doing a China game, sure, it helps you managing eunuchs, but then just, you know, you'd rather be able to, actually still expand, deal with rebels. Like, heck, even if you want to worry about rebellion in some states, humanists would be more effective in helping with that. And dealing with rebels isn't really that big of a problem in this game. So, if you just know how to micro China well, you're not going to struggle with Horde Ideas. Don't attack a horde randomly as China without having the ability to win. Don't mismanage your eunuchs. And then boom, you're not going to have mandate issues. So I don't know. It's just bad. It's definitely. I think it's better than Maritime. I think it's better than Expansion, but it's not like Core Ideas, because at least Core Ideas does kind of help you in the thing it's intended to help you, which is estate management, but which isn't really a problem in this game. But it's better than these two. So I guess it's the top of D tier, but Core Ideas are still bad. Don't take them. You'll regret it. Any of these above it are better. Okay, now here's the part where we do the government specific idea groups. These are technically military idea groups, but they're unique because they don't only just buff your military, but rather buff your whole nation in a way that's more general. And so these are going to be ranked a bit differently from military idea groups because I'm not looking at them of how well they buff your military, but rather than modifiers as a whole. We're going to start with aristocratic ideas, which you need to be a monarchy or a republic with a noble's estate. In my opinion, aristocratic ideas are Like they're good for cav builds, so you can use them there. That's what they're most famous for. But they're just not that good otherwise. Like the -5% dev cost is outmatched by infrastructure. The manpower is outmatched by quantity ideas. Just you really don't want to take aristocratic ideas unless you have a specific policy, which it does have a couple of good Republic tradition ones for some reason. But I don't know. I just think that it's C tier. You shouldn't take it unless you have a specific build in mind, which otherwise, for general usage, it's not that good. It's not like Quad or Expansion where it's like it's going to hobble you or encourage you to play the game in a way that's not going to help your country very much. But it's just still not going to be that great. I'd recommend taking anything above it in terms, even including Humanist, in terms of doing stuff in this game. Now we've got Divine. And Divine is such a tragedy of an idea group because it is probably the worst out of the government type idea groups just because a lot of its military modifiers, like the reduction to different kinds of damage, aren't a very good way of reducing damage. I prefer tactics like discipline or morale to win battles. So my troops aren't, I don't have like one regiment just being killed because the rest of the army ran away. Those are way more effective ways in terms of modifiers. So that's why I don't like Divine Ideas. It has a couple of good-ish policies, but it's just like I prefer a different kind of military idea group. It's like the manpower, again, it's outclassed by quantity. National unrest, it's outclassed by humanist. The military modifiers aren't that good. The dev cost is outclassed by infrastructure. I don't know who reduces war exhaustion through Diplo points, unless you have too many lying around or something really horrible has happened, which you should have taken a better idea group to keep that really horrible thing from happening. So Divine probably maybe the top of D tier. I mean, it's better than all these. I guess I'll put it up to C tier. It's it's not good. It's not going to encourage you to play in the game that's actively harmful like these three. So I guess it's better than C tier. You're not gonna like be like, oh, why am I playing the game worse now because I took this? But it's the bottom of C tier. It's only up here because these three are just so bad. Horde ideas are next, and they are for anybody that's a horde. And they are an interesting idea group. They give you a lot of buffs to cavalry, a lot of buffs to essentially being a horde, like your horde unity, caravan power, which gives you more inland trade. And all those things are hard to get as a horde, so those buffs are surely useful for them. It also gives you access to policies that give you more raising, which is a wonderful thing. You sort of need that as a horde to be viable later in the game. And it does give you very good cavalry combat costs and power in terms of combat ability. Unfortunately, the best way to take it is with aristocratic ideas, which you can't do because you are a horde. And so you could start as a horde, and then once it stalls out with the economic problems, you go become a monarchy, which then you have this, neat horde ideas running around. But it's the cav isn't that good in my opinion unless you've got both. I will say that the the less aggressive expansion's nice, the less land attrition's nice, and the max promoted cultures is nice. It's definitely one of the better government ones. So I think it's, you know, I'd say it's not the equivalent to the. I mean, I'd say it's yeah, it's probably deserves to be up here. It's good in those situations of managing yourself as a horde and being viable later in the game. I don't think hordes are that good later in the game, but you can still try. But it's definitely, if you stay as a horde, it's B tier. If you stop being a horde, it's probably just above aristocratic. So in the situation you're taking, it's an option. It's not a terrible one. I think these ones above it are better. But like compared to, yeah, it's definitely not the level of humanist or Horde ideas. So I'll give it up here. It's you need this idea group you want to stay as a horde and for it to be viable. Now, one of my favorite idea groups in the game is Indigenous Ideas. I know so many people that look at this and go, "Oh, I hate playing as natives. Natives are terrible to play in this game. You get conquered so quickly. You have no tech. Indigenous Ideas are bad at results." And that's just a horrible way of viewing them. Partially because native games are extremely fun. I've had probably some of the best games of my life as a North American native. So I think they're just it's fun to play as them. You can build yourself up ground from nothing. You can do so much as flexibility with these countries, and you can, in terms of becoming like any government type you like, it's a reliable way to become a republic. It's also what I like about being a native is that it's such a challenge. EU4 can get boring and stale from the incompetence of the AI. And so playing as a native can be really fun. One of the sad things, though, is Mesoamericans and Andean natives don't have access to Indigenous Ideas. Only the OPM types do when you're migrating around, which is unfortunate because I think that this side group is way better for them than Aristocratic, which is the usual option they have. But I mean, it is what it is. In terms of the idea group itself, which is the other reason why it shouldn't be placed on D tier, is that it's insanely good. It gives you like minus 20% war score cost, which was alone able to put diplomatic pretty high up. It has idea cost, which I mentioned is like the one thing that saves humanist. Boom, it's here. You've got morale of armies, manpower, a tiny amount of dev cost, which isn't that great, but at least you know. But something else that's kind of cool though is that this has so many policies that reduce your dev cost. It gives you, every modifier in this idea group is pretty good. And I don't really like reform progress that much in most countries, mostly because you don't need it unless you are a republic, because you don't really have that many reforms to fill out if you're a republic. But unless you're a republic, but republics give you that buff anyway. But Native Americans actually need it so they can catch up on the reforms that they didn't have because they have a different reform type system. So overall, Indigenous Ideas are just incredible. It's definitely a thank you from Paradox to say, hey, you survived being an OPM with no tech in the middle of nowhere. Congrats, here's a great idea group. In my opinion, it's said, like, I mean, it's, how they said, it's, if I compare it to Diplomatic, the two are basically comparable. So I'd say it's like it's about as good as Diplomatic. I think it still doesn't give you the aggressive expansion reduction and the flexibility and new options that Diplomatic gives you, so I won't put it above it as the best idea group in the game, but it's definitely a close second. I think Indigenous Ideas are just the second best idea group in the game. Every time I am playing a native, I take them very early. I love playing with it, and whenever I don't take it and decide to do a different kind of build, I wish I could take Indigenous Ideas. And every time I play a game with the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Inca, the number one thing that bothers me is they don't have access to this idea group. So if you're watching this Paradox, please give Indigenous Ideas access to Mesoamerican and Andean natives. It would make so much more interesting. But I get if you want to lock it behind the OPMs. I mean, the OPM is a unique challenge. You're just migrating around in either Australia or North America. Even if you do master, it's not that hard. But this idea group is so necessary to keep natives from being completely unviable in multiplayer games. It's just such a beautiful idea group. I love it. Anyway, so rant over. The last government type idea group is Plutocratic Ideas. And plutocratic ideas are an option if you are a republic or if you are a monarchy who's taken the plutocracy government reform, which essentially makes your monarchy act like a merchant republic if you are in somewhere in Asia, typically is where you're allowed to take it. And plutocratic ideas are pretty solid. The plus 10% morale of armies is great. The 0.1 monthly reform progress modifier might seem a little weird, but it's there because republics get a massive bonus to monthly reform progress. So this is a great bonus here. The mercenary cost is good in an emergency. And if you look at a lot of these other modifiers, it's a fairly solid idea group. I like the burger loyalty too, because if you're playing as a republic, especially a merchant republic, I find that my burger loyalty gets really high in the early game. So this makes it a lot easier to manage. I'm not worried about a plutocratic coup all the time, which is whenever I play merchant republic seems to be my constant struggle. Just plutocratic coup incoming. I have to go to a war. That has the characteristic plus minus 5% development cost. It has the caravan power that I like from Horde Ideas, and it has the good minus, let's say, plus 10% goods produced, which is just, the strong thing that carries economic ideas is also here. So, combined with its policies, it's great. I think it belongs at the end of A tier. I usually don't pick up this idea group in Republic till later because these ones in S tier are such higher priority for me usually. But I mean, it's definitely better than the B tier ones. I mean, if you compare it to economic ideas, which, it's just slightly better across the board in doing what I want to do in games. So, end of A tier, probably the weakest of A tier, but still a solid idea group. And the strongest government type idea group other than Indigenous, which is really hard to pick up because, you have to be a specific kind of native. Now that we have finished the government type idea groups, I'd like to talk about the military ones. And military idea groups are different from other idea groups because you have to be using a military for them to be good. If you spend all game just, not really going to wars, not really blobbing, these aren't going to be that great of an idea group. Or if you're taking fights against much weaker nations than you, then you're never going to need these idea groups. But you're going to be hitting resistance against bigger countries in EU4 unless you play completely defensively and passively. Other countries are going to blob around you. And so you're going to need military idea groups to be able to reliably crush the AI usually. You don't usually need more than one or two to do so. Although lately, 1.37, I find the AI has been a lot better at taking them lately, especially near the late of the game. And so, if you don't take a military idea group, you're basically sitting around doing nothing with no plan, usually just deving away of infrastructure ideas, which can be fun, but I'd prefer, to be actively expanding all the time. And so the value of the military idea groups, of course, is dependent on how often you use them. If you're a passive player, you're not going to have as much use out of these. But overall, I'd say the vast majority of players, is military ideas encourage you to behave more aggressively, and that's a good thing, and that's a perk of taking them compared to these tier D tier ones, which encourage you to play suboptimally, which you shouldn't be doing that. So the first one is offensive ideas. Offensive ideas are great mostly because they buff your generals. This is the one idea group that gives you probably the best generals of leader shock, leader fire. I like it for that reason. It also is well known for its land force limit modifier near the end. And the part of why that's good is it's not as good as quantity, but it's a way that you can get bigger military. So if an idea group that buffs your military without using quantity, and that's a nice buff. It's also well known for its good policies, particularly, as I mentioned, the separatism one that makes humanist viable, the movement speed ones. Offensive is just a fairly solid idea group with its 5% discipline and its siege ability as its strongest modifiers. They're not very flashy, but of course, stacking discipline makes you win battles. Stacking siege ability makes you beat forts. In single player, it solves most of your military problems fairly well. And so I think it deserves a high A tier. It's definitely, I'd probably say, yeah, high A tier. It's probably the best of A tier. It's not as strong as some of these other ones and or as universal, but I think that it does consistently make your military better. Won't ever make it like crazy better. Like it's not gonna game change your nation, but it's still a good idea group. I'd recommend picking it up if you have the space. Next, we have defensive ideas, and defensive ideas are probably the weakest of the main four military idea groups, being offensive, defensive, quality, quantity. The reason for that is that it's very front loaded, and so the first two are extremely good with army tradition from battles and morale of armies. Those two are both are incredible. The army tradition from battles is really good because that's your main way of getting army tradition in the game, and army tradition gives you better generals, it gives you more morale. And the plus 50% morale of armies, it's will make your armies very tough to beat at battles. It's what holds it back is a couple of its modifiers aren't very good, like land maneuvers. I hate having maneuver in my generals. It's weird because you might be like, well, maneuver is a pip, and pips are great. But you might be like, well, yeah. But what I end up happening is I'll have like a 30 or 40k stack with a 6 maneuver general going into battles like a week or two before the rest of my armies and getting stack wiped. And so, maneuver isn't that great. The land reinforce speed is pretty good. Um, but its main gist of like helping you defend your country, the fort modifiers aren't good enough to make forts good. Now I'm not saying you can't make forts good. In fact, that's a good, but you unfortunately have to take quantity and innovative ideas to get really high garrisons and crush the fort maintenance cost to make late game forts viable. If you do that, great defensive is a huge piece of that to make it good. But overall, just defensive is just by far the weakest of them. It's that's its problem. It's not a bad idea group, and it's fairly reliable, but it's not going to do the job compared to the other idea groups. It's outcompeted, and that's what B tier is. It's a good idea group, or it can be OP in certain situations, but it's generally outcompeted by the other idea groups. Next is quality ideas. And quality ideas are a unbelievably versatile idea group. You need a stronger military that's good at killing. I think these ideas are the best at giving you what it says a high quality army. You want good policies, great. Quality gives you amazing policies. It gives you plus 15% infantry combat ability if innovative, plus 5% with economic. It's just the best at making your military better. The main downside that quality has is it makes your ships better, which you you might be like, wait, what? Oh, right, because Navy's not good in this game. But what's nice about quality is it gives you the ability to buff your ships, and so if you are even parity with another nation in fleet, it makes your fleet better. And it doesn't do so in a way that completely sucks out an entire idea slot. Because some of the biggest problems that you have are addressed by quality. Your ships run away with low morale, higher morale. You've got too much attrition, less attrition. Makes your ships have higher durability. These are the stuff that you actually want on your ships. These are good naval buffs, and I think they're actually better than the maritime buffs, despite quality being not designed to make your ships better by that much as an idea group. So for that reason, from the sheer versatility of making your ships better, the great policies, your troops better, it's just always good. You can't go wrong by taking quality. I've never taken quality in a game and I went, oh no, I messed up by taking quality. Now my game is worse. Like that doesn't ever happen. I usually regret not taking quality. I'll fight a battle with like 40k troops attacking 30k, and I lose because my troops suck because I didn't go into quality. So overall, I recommend taking quality pretty much almost every game. I'd say it's above espionage, below admin ideas, and how good it is. Just take quality. If you take it early, take an idea group with it, like economic, that gives you a buff. So the last army idea group is quantity. And I'll be honest, I don't like quantity. It's not fun for me, but it's not because it's a bad idea group. In fact, I think it's too good in EU4. It gives you plus 33% manpower and plus 33% land force limit, which means you essentially just have an army that's 33% bigger. Why? Because the main constraints to building a big military are force limit, because your economy will just crash and punish you for going over it, and manpower, which you now have more of. But also, this idea group gives you cheaper military through the cheaper regiment costs and land maintenance reduction, and makes having that military more easy because you have more supply and less army attrition. So for those reasons, you now just have a bigger military. And what else a lot of people don't realize is that quantity is a secret Diplomatic Idea Group. The reason for that is that the number one thing the AI looks at in terms of army strength, because that's how it determines should it attack you, should it be your ally, is your army size. So because your army is 33% bigger now, it's easier to get alliances, you're less likely to get attacked. And so for those reasons, quantity are an S tier idea group. In fact, it pairs super well with diplomatic ideas, which is another S tier idea group because of its policy that gives you +1 diplo reputation and plus 10% land force limit. And so the combination is just unbelievably powerful in terms of getting alliances and winning wars early game. You might think about, like, the early game, what's your main problems? You need better alliances. You need more troops. You need to be able to attack your neighbors using your alliances because your favor generates too slowly. Those are things that quantity all solves. Quantity is super powerful early game. So then why don't I like this idea group? It's just not fun for me. I think about quantity and it just gives you too many troops at the end of the game. Because, like, when you have 200, 300,000 troops, like, it's fun for a while. But once you hit to, like, 600, 700, 800,000, it's too many troops to micro. I don't want to micro, like, 15, 50 stacks. Like, that's way too much for me. I don't want to play micro simulator. I want to be doing diplomacy, country management. Those are the things that I enjoy of EU4, not microing a million stacks across the world. And compared to, let's say, like a quality mindset, where you have a few army stacks that are very good. So you're like Prussia, you go quality, innovative, offensive, and defensive. So you just have a lot of discipline, a lot of morale, a lot of army tradition, good generals. And then you have like your 30k stack, attack a 60k stack up a mountain, and then you stack wipe it because your army is just so much better than it. That's such an amazing feeling. I love that. It's fun having a high quality army. But then in quality, you just, if that happens to you, you just rebuild your army. Like, you just build more troops and you just win through sheer spam. And for those reasons, quantity is just such a powerful thing in this game. It's hard to not take it. And I don't like that I have to take it almost every game in order to do super well. And you don't have to, but the game's just playing on hard mode for me if I don't play quantity. That's why I actually go out of my way to not take quantity, because I want the game to be more of a challenge. But the problem with that in the end is I find that the game will eventually punish me for not taking quantity. In fact, my group will say, well, Orange has something's happened to Orange. They're struggling right now. We're in a bit of a crisis because they've taken quantity ideas. They're in a rough spot. That's how we know things are going tough, because quantity successfully solves those problems. There was this one game where I was having a great game as the Netherlands. I used exploration to rush Mexico, went infrastructure, developed my land like crazy, and I had 400,000 troops by 1600. And Vijayanagar fought India, and the Ming never exploded, so they unified the horde. They took all the hordes, and the two had 700,000 troops each. And I wanted to expand to Asia beyond Indonesia, but I couldn't because I had 400,000 troops, and they had 700,000 troops. And that was just so insurmountable. And it was just the game punishing me because both of them took quantity. And so if the game had continued, I probably would have taken quantity so that I could attack them by 1700. But that's the kind of things in this game where quantity is just so good that it belongs in S tier. It works super well with these idea groups too. So it belongs here. I hate that it belongs here. It should be nerfed back down to 25% manpower and force limit. That's where I felt was a sweet spot, but I got buffed to 33, and so it belongs back here in S tier. Hatred of quantity rant over Naval Ideas. Now, y'all might think, well, OrangeGambit put Maritime at D tier, so Naval Ideas is going to go in D tier, done. Now we're going to Mercenary Ideas. But that's not what I'm going to do here. In my opinion, Naval Ideas are actually pretty good because they actually solve one problem that Navy has, where your Navy can't really support your land troops. And Naval Ideas solves that pretty well through a couple of reasons. First, it gives you minus 100% naval barrage cost, which means that whenever you're sieging a fort by the coast and you have enough ships to blockade it, you just break it. And that is super good. Makes it so that you don't have to deal with cannons early game. It makes it so that you don't have to deal with forts near the coast. Your sieges are super fast. Secondly, it also gives you a reduced landing penalty. So when you actually are using your troops after you win the naval battle to attack somebody, they actually have a higher chance of winning because you don't have to deal with a -2 naval penalty. It's only a -1, which is still bad, but it's not as horrific. It gives you +1 blockade impact on siege, which makes sieges even quicker. And it also makes your ships better. And you might think, well, Maritime gave you more ships. Why isn't that super great? But more ships, because of how I mentioned earlier with naval engagement, with only so many ships being able to fire at a time, you want better ships over more ships. And Naval Ideas does that well. And so if you can have a couple of heavy ships because of the heavy combat ability and the durability, filling up the entire global fleet engagement, and they beat every ship that tries to attack it, it doesn't matter how many ships you have them. Your better ships are going to destroy the fleet with more ships. And so if you're ever playing a game in like Indonesia, the UK, or Malta, where you actually need a navy to survive, well, naval ideas are just going to be better than maritime every step of the way. And in fact, the ability to have your navy coordinate with your land makes having an overseas empire using ships more viable. And so for that reason, I actually think it belongs it belongs in B tier. In fact, I'll put it over exploration ideas. And the reason for that is if you are in Indonesia, that's the main region where this is useful. I think this is actually an A or even S tier idea group. I think that like you need naval ideas in order to do super well there because your army and your fleet can work together to take out forts, to land, to conquer each island in ways that maritime just can't. Maritime gives you a fleet that's big, loses battles, and can't do anything. Navy ideas makes it so that you can coordinate the two. And making Navy actually useful makes naval ideas good. If you're also a multiplayer and you want to meme people, play England, pick naval ideas, spam heavy ships, and then you're just untouchable. You just blockade everyone. That's something else you can do with naval ideas super well. You just become super powerful on the seas, and you will beat somebody with maritime. You will, and so if you do naval quality, you just dominate the seas. Now, if you do maritime, yeah, you can have super naval depth stacks of doom, but that's so overinvestment into the fleet. You need to invest into like the ability to core land, develop it. That's way more useful. So you can confirm Thessaloniki with it. So I guess it's not like totally useless, but naval ideas are leaps and better over maritime. It's a good idea group if you need a fleet to work with your land troops. So it belongs into B tier above Horde and Exploration. Lastly, there are mercenary ideas. Mercenary ideas are an okay idea group to make your mercenaries a lot stronger and easier to purchase and buy. And it makes it so that your mercenaries are really powerful. And that early game, if you invest a lot into your mercenaries, like save a lot of money and buy them out a bunch of mercs, because the main downside of mercenaries is that they don't really have cannons with them, which are a problem. Or in the early game, or when you have Miltech 7 and cannons are only useful for sieges, this can let you dominate your neighbors. So it lets you do, and if you got another nation that already has mercenary tech cost reduction like Burgundy, you can shank a lot of people very quickly. So it's really powerful early game. The problem is that it doesn't scale so well, mostly because that a lot of them buffs only apply to mercenaries, like mercenary discipline. And if you do mercenary heavy builds, you're slowly gonna have to inevitably be replacing your army with more and more non-mercenary troops just because there's not going to be enough of mercenaries near the end of the game to fill your 400, 500,000 quantity force limit. But also, you just don't have enough cannons. And so for that reason, mercenary ideas don't scale very well. I don't recommend them unless you're like Burgundy or Venice in the early game. But they do make you stronger than your neighbors. They do have a nice niche, so I'll put them in the lower B tier ideas. You can do, as I said, crazy things early game with them, which is how kind of the realm of how B tier works. You got very good specific strats that they're useful for, but they're not generally useful. They're not new player friendly. You can't just plug and play it like, oh, in the middle of game, oh, I like mercenaries, I'll just do well now. That's not how these work. you really need to commit hard to mercenaries for them to work. So that's why they belong in B tier. Well, that's all of the EU4 idea groups. I hope you learned something from my rankings and my analysis of the modifiers. Please like, subscribe, comment below, especially if you disagree with me on something. Maybe you think quant ideas are good and shouldn't be nerfed, they're a fun part of the game, or Horde ideas are actually better than I think they are, and I should respect the monthly reform progress modifier. And anything else like that, please comment. I love a good debate. I'll try my best to respond. But regardless, I hope you have a wonderful day